Happy Tuesday of Earth Week. Very exciting. Hope everyone's doing well.
Hope you guys tuned into our first video yesterday, introducing Leave No Trace. Today we're going to be talking about the very first two principles of Leave No Trace. The first one being plan ahead and prepare, and the second one being hike and camp on durable surfaces. So you're going to start with me. We're going to go ahead and start talking about how to plan ahead and prepare for your excursions into the wilderness.
Enjoy!
All right, so the first LNT principle that we're going to talk about is number 1, plan ahead and prepare. I think that this principle tends to be overlooked a lot just because it doesn't seem as glamorous as the other principles, but it's really critically important in making sure that you have a safe, enjoyable, and a sustainable trip. There's a lot of forethought that goes into making trips sustainable. I know that when TAP trips go out in the field, we think a lot about ways that we can stay sustainable and minimize our impact just even before we go out into the backcountry. Poor planning can also result in some miserable campers, and then if you are involved in a situation that you didn't necessarily plan for or weren't well prepared for, then it requires you to rely really heavily on natural and cultural resources that are around you, which can leave a pretty significant trace on whatever area you are recreating in. So there's some things to kind of consider even just before you go out on whatever adventure you want to go on. And the first is identify your goals for the trip. So make sure that you have an idea of what you're doing that day. Or over the course of those days. It can be, a 3-mile day hike or, a 3-week backpacking trip. But it's really important to figure out what your goals for your excursion are going to be and then kind of build your planning, build your LNT framework and your sustainability practices around whatever goals you're setting for yourself or for your group. Really related to that is another thing to consider is you should also assess the skill level of all the participants in your outdoor excursion. Lots of people are at different skill levels. You can have an expert paddler, expert climber, beginner climber. Even things like hiking can be really challenging for certain individuals. And if you have an individual who happens to be really overexerting themselves, or if you have somebody who is, underskilled and participating in a highly technical activity like setting up a climbing route or paddling really white water, then you can end up in an emergency situation, which is bad from a safety standpoint. You should try to avoid dangerous situations to begin with, but emergency rescues oftentimes take up a whole lot of resources and disrupt natural environments pretty heavily. And so that can have a pretty significant impact on the environment that you're in. If you think of how much wildlife you can scare just being out on a hike, imagine what a whole team of rescuers will do to the critters in an area. But more than that, it could require some actual physical restructuring of the land around you. Not saying any of that to scare anybody, but you should consider the skill level of everybody involved in your trip before you go on it. One other really important piece of planning ahead and preparing is kind of becoming acquainted with whatever area of wilderness you plan on going into before even getting there. And a really, really great resource for that is to call the land management agency that is going to be in charge of whatever public land you're going to. So a lot of wilderness is, either state park or national park, and there are definitely ranger stations that you can call, and they'll give you all the updates that you need about that particular spot of land before you even go in there. That's checking things like weather. Weather is huge for safety, and also to make sure that you are prepared to go into whatever environment you want to go into. Weather can have a huge effect on the kind of terrain that you're going to be hiking on. It can turn, perfectly dry land into wet, sloggy mush, and that can really greatly affect your travel time, which will then put you into a more precarious spot, and it'll be harder to leave less of a trace. It's also important to know about how protected the terrain that you're going to be traveling on is, or how protected, I guess, the recreation area is. Ranger stations will oftentimes have a lot of information about closures due to animal activity. I know that I'm a climber, and a lot of the times the places that I climb are closed because raptors are nesting, and we don't want to go in there and disturb their habitat during a very, very vulnerable time for that particular kind of animal, raising their young, hatching their young. So make sure that you call a ranger station, figure out what the typical weather is, figure out what the kind of terrain is, and then also see if they have any regulations or restrictions that you need to abide by. Lots of times ranger stations will have information about things like fire bans, or ways that they would prefer you to build fire or get firewood. And a lot of land management agencies have these leave no trace principles in mind. They want you to come and visit. The outdoors is a wonderful and welcoming place, and it's definitely an enjoyable place to explore and to play. I love it. The Tribe Venture program loves it. That's why we do what we do. But it is also really important that we are following some ethics or some guidelines to make sure that we're not taking advantage of the space, and making sure that it's a place that others can go and enjoy as well. So identify your goals, identify your skill level, get to know the place you're going. So call land management agencies, get as much information as you possibly can. And then after that, you can start to decide what kind of equipment you need to bring that will allow you to leave the least trace. The simplest thing, and we'll get into that more for principle number 3, waste management, is, for instance, TAP. We plan ahead and prepare on all of our trips by bringing trash, recycling, and compost. So we bring a compost bin, we bring a recycling container, and then a trash container, depending on the kind of trip. And, we like to carry out that sustainable mission through all of our trips. And there is definitely specialized equipment that you can bring that leaves less of a trace. Plan on bringing a backpacking stove versus building a campfire, because backpacking stoves are super leave no trace. So you can kind of custom fit and pick the equipment that you want to bring, so that you can go in, have your experience, and then pack it all up and bring everything out with you, so there's almost no trace left of your presence there in that wilderness. It's really, really hard to leave no trace if you don't have the tools that you need with you to make it possible to leave no trace. Like I said earlier in the video, otherwise you're required to use a lot of natural and cultural resources that end up having an impact on whatever area you're in. So before you go out, plan ahead and prepare, and you will be on your way to leaving no trace while you're in the wilderness. And I'm going to hand you over to Ariane. She's going to go over the second leave no trace principle, which is hike and camp on durable surfaces.
Hi everyone, I am the other outdoor recreation assistant here at William & Mary. You just learned about the first LNT principle, which is plan ahead and prepare with Allison, and I'm going to be talking to you about the second LNT principle, which is travel or walk and camp on durable surfaces. And this is a principle that we can actually use in our life every day. It's very popular, and it's something that you can actually keep in the front of your mind when you go outside or anywhere that you go. So what are durable surfaces? It's well-paved paths instead of cutting across. So how many times have you cut across on either grass or maybe on gravel, trying to get to class because you're a little bit behind and it's just a little bit more convenient? So those are just out of convenience. They're not actually supposed to be there, especially if there's already like a little trail there. I know there's a few on campus, and there's a whole bunch in the area that I live. And those things are just not supposed to be there. So the paved paths that there are supposed to help the vegetation grow around the paths. When you're cutting through, it actually hurts the vegetation, it hurts the things that are growing, it's hurting the ground, not allowing plants and grass and other things that should be growing, not growing, because you're stomping on it. So the ideal surfaces to walk on are established trails, rock, gravel, dry grass, and snow. And in popular areas, front country or back country, concentrating on existing trails. So that does include like trails that we have around the campus, which are like concrete, or the trails that we have in the woods that are like meant to be there, not the cutting through just to make something, one of the trails, shorter. If you are camping, trying to camp at least 200 feet away from water and streams, and that's because the the ground that is closer to the water is actually less durable and usually a lot squishier, it's a lot softer, and we're trying to minimize the impact that we have on the ground, so trying to find a space away from water that's a little bit more durable. Also trying to keep your campsite small and focus on areas that the vegetation is absent. So you're not trying to camp on a flower bed, you're trying to camp on maybe like dirt that's a little bit more durable. Also, if you can try to walk in a single file line in the middle of the trail, even if it's wet or muddy. So I know, especially when you're hiking, there could be this really big puddle after a rainstorm. Now, if you are walking around the puddle, and if everyone's walking around the puddle, it's actually making the trail softer in those areas, and that just creates puddles to grow and grow and grow. So if you try to stay as close to the middle as possible, then the trail will always stay in the middle as possible, so that the trail doesn't expand and the water doesn't expand. So I challenge you to look around your areas and see what paths that you actually don't even think about. You might not cut across, and try to stay on the paths that are supposed to be there. So on the concrete, on the established trails. So look for those, and look for the ones that people just cut across and they're putting an impact on the ground, and now I want you to focus on trying to minimize. So that is number 2 of LNT that we're going to be talking about. Hey everyone, so I wanted to just actually show you what I was talking about for the second principle of Leave No Trace, which is travel on and camp on durable surfaces. So this is a trail that was man-made between 2 popular stores. So if you can see it, so it goes from one store to the other store that's across the street, and there's this path here, and a lot of people walk on it. Instead of just going onto the pavement and walking around to the other store, they would rather walk on this man-made path. And it kind of looks like it's supposed to be there because so many people have actually walked on it, but it's really not an okay thing to do. So you're supposed to, if you can, try to minimize this, because vegetation can't actually grow here. Because now that there's gravel, because it's been beaten down so much. So if you see something like that, it is not okay to walk on it. You're actually impacting that area. So if you can try to find the durable surface around it, which in this case would be going onto the concrete and walking to the other store. And I know that there's areas on campus that this happens a lot too, so trying to minimize those areas would be best.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to our Leave No Trace videos with the Tribe Adventure program.
I hope you enjoyed them.
We're really excited to be here with you guys to celebrate Earth Week, and make sure that you go and check out the other videos that are being posted, the webinars by everybody across William and Mary.
Those are some really good ones, and you should go and check those out.
Yeah, let's help rep sustainability and think about ways that you can apply the Leave No Trace principles into your own life. Watch out for our video tomorrow.